Come on, somebody. Yes, up again.
Thank you, everybody, for some really interesting presentations there. I've got a comment and a question for Jelka. Thanks very much for your presentation again, really interesting. Particularly welcome the comments there on needing to support long-term change for gender equality and supporting the measurement of results qualitatively, not just looking at short-term programme results. And also welcome the comments there on supporting feminist action, which is locally led through local organisation and movement actors. So that's the what. What I'm quite interested in is the how. How can this be done in an environment where donors are increasingly looking at the results agenda, scaling up results, which is often very quantitatively measured, and looking at this as the kind of trend in many cases when it comes to donors. Here at ODI, I've been working with some researchers, including Tam O'Neill, who's made some proposals around this in terms of adaptive programming. But to achieve this, really, we need to look at ways of programming and delivering funds in ways that are able to be adaptive, recognising that change is non-linear and complex and messy, and it's not always able to be predicted at the outset. And we've been looking at ways in which donors can realistically start to look at kind of reconciling these two things, the agenda around results, etc., and the kind of messy nature of change. And one way that we've started to look at is around perhaps dispersing funds through women's funds, etc., who are used to working with actors on the ground and being quite responsive. We're looking at various things, but I'm just quite interested from your point of view if you've also explored this and have any suggestions to make on the how this can be done, how to support change on the ground in ways that reconcile these different aspects of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Do we have any other question? Oh yes, over here.
Thank you very much to the speakers. Helen Dennis from Christian Aid. I was interested in the relationship with measures to combat economic inequality and the extent to which anti-discrimination measures in the context of wider efforts to promote a broader, more inclusive economic development in a society, whether there's been any comparative work done about the extent to which these discrimination measures need to take place in that kind of broader context, and the likely success or not of those measures depending on the wider policy environment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. There.
This is I expect sort of a comment from Kote, Alex. You made a very important point about the not collecting the data itself. If you don't have data on discrimination or you don't have data on inequality between male and female with respect to many indicators, you have nothing to comment. So the first step is to just hide the reality by not generating data, and particularly on the discrimination issue. There is a huge resistance in many countries. There is a willingness to have a code for male and female, and you get inequality. But to develop a methodology whereby you captured discrimination in various aspects of social and economic and political life is still very difficult. What is your understanding at the international level? You did mention that.
Okay, so we've got some very specific questions to certain panel members, so maybe we'll take those in order. So we'll take Abigail's question to Jelka first.
Thank you, Abigail. It's a difficult question, and I don't have a straightforward answer, as I'm sure you realize. But I appreciate that you're working on this, and that ODI is trying to think about what it means for your relationship with donors, because I think that's part of the problem. So my first point is about the politics of data, as Alex mentioned, but very much from a perspective of what is the aim and the objective of the data that is being asked. What kind of evidence and why? And I think too often we fail to ask these questions. So what kind of evidence and why is one point, but also how that evidence is collected. So there's a lot of evidence in my field around sexual violence. There's databases that are being created already based on very flawed data. So how can you come up with an indicator that is already based on a massive amount of flawed data? Because the donor wants it. So that's the politics of it. And I think we can resist it. We can just say, well, this data is not good enough. It doesn't tell us enough. Now, but how can we provide better data? Then is the question. And so my critique is very much of the sort of very limited perspective of what evidence might be and how that is translated in numbers, in quantitative. Especially composite indicators, which are just not reliable enough. So what I'd like to see, and the practical aspect of that, I'm not sure how that works out, but my main question is, can't our quantitative data collection be better and more based on qualitative research? So in my perspective, the quantitative data evidence is just too flawed. Okay, so what do you do about it? Well, I believe more in more in-depth qualitative data. Now, the consequence of that is that it costs way more work and time and resources, no? Because that means super big surveys with well-trained people going around country. And so that's the problem, funding. And that then goes back to the politics of data and evidence. So it's a dynamic that is not easy to solve, but I do think it's a conversation that we need to continue and to continue work on, because I think it's very important in the end.
If maybe Alex can respond to the specific question from Sukade, and then we'll go back to the bigger question about linking to wider poverty and economic frameworks.
I think that this has been at the core of the last 2-3 years discussion around disaggregation of data. Mm-hmm. And I think when you saw, we were in most of the meeting, in the expert meeting on the SDG indicators, and you saw the reluctance. While disaggregation of data was proclaimed as a must, when you come to National Statistical Office and experts, the reluctance to engage in such a work. And when it came to disability, the key issue was, we don't know how to do it. It's difficult. It will cost. It's not reliable yet, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's it's all about pushing. We need to continue to push. We need to demand. And I think there is what we saw, the Washington group, which is the city group who have developed specific questions for instance, disability disaggregation, has done an assessment of capacity of countries to actually disaggregate data, and it's better than people say it is. And I think it's just, and I can tell you that when we talk with organization of persons with disability and government, the problem is they don't ask the National Statistical Office to do the disaggregation of data. They could. They have the data sets, but they don't do the disaggregation. So I think one of the work that ODI and others are doing and should do more is actually doing it. Take the data set, disaggregate the data, and show, yes, you can. Just do it. If we can do it, you can do it. I mean, and this is something that is, I think, extremely important. We agree also that disaggregation of main household surveys and census is key, but it will not replace massive specific surveys to know more about causality. Because what you get, and I think this is the biggest weakness we see in the SDG, especially for groups that are discriminated, is it's all focused on outcome. And I think one of the key issues we need to have, and it links also to the second question and the first one, is when you put in place anti-discrimination measures, what's your reasonable expectation of time frame for outcome? You know it will not come in 2 years. You know it will not come in 5 years. And we know that when it comes to persons with disability, education, for instance, if government begin to be proactive now and collect data now and do things now, we will get real outcome for children and people in 10 years by the time things get moving. So how do you measure? And I think I would really attract the attention of many on the OACHR, the human rights indicators, this blend between outcome, process, and structure indicators. And you need to look at not only what what are the results, but also what is done to achieve the results. And it works, I think, in regard to gender equality and for minorities and discriminated groups. I think it's really important.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to add to that discussion?
Yeah, I think just to reinforce what's been said, I mean, with this whole approach now on results-based frameworks and looking at results and outcomes that donors are pushing for, again, on the one hand, it's a welcome thing. It's useful to look at what is actually the impact on the ground. But the time frames that are being proposed, I think, in many cases are just simply unrealistic. They don't understand the nature of the activity that's going on and the nature of the outcome and how long it can possibly take. So I think I really think there's a huge need to address this discussion at the level of donors as well, who are supporting some of this work that NGOs are doing and that governments are doing, to say that, good for you that you're starting to look at results, but think about how you're doing it, because if you set yourself up to fail, you're not going to help anybody in the process. And you really need to see that results are very they're incremental. You'll win one thing, and that will help you to achieve the next chain and the link. You're not going to get it in one wham bam movement. It's just not possible. So I think Abigail mentioned that about how some women's funds, for example, are trying to look at how you do that kind of work and how you try and track it. And so I think storytelling and qualitative studies, those kinds of things really take on a great importance, because you're also trying to document the work of social movements and how the social movements are able to build on the kind of standards that are being created. So, for example, in the study, the work around the Employment Guarantee Act, I mean, that act would be meaningless without the movement that was behind and before it. So I think, filtering, maybe building that into understanding, as Alex just said, that, even when you're understanding results, you have to do it or you're looking at indicators, you have to do it alongside process and structure, not just result alone.
Okay, thank you. Alex, you want to come back?
No, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Jelka, is there anything else you would like to add to the bigger question of outcomes?
No, well, I think everything. I think we're reinforcing each other. I mean, I very much agree. Well, basically, so Anna and I had a very brief conversation beforehand about systematic reviewing and what that means, and how the method limits what you can look at in this particular case, for example, no? And then Sarah comes up with all these qualitative stories about this worked here and this come there, and this. That is such important information, but it doesn't fit the method, and that method is very much imposed by sort of the paradigm of what is good evidence. So we need to continue these conversations and push the paradigm. Would be my point.
I got it back.
Okay, final point. Then we'll have a break.
The tyranny of evidence. And I really want to emphasize that. We had the discussion with some donors. Show us what works. Nobody ever tried. I cannot show you something that does not exist. If in low and middle income countries, very few have ever tried real inclusive and non-discriminatory policies with regards to persons with disability or some other groups, how can I show you evidence? How can you show you what works? And I think it's like, you're too late. Sorry, you should have begun years ago. Now you should have evidence, and then we could replicate, scale up. And I think we should not forget social innovation. We should not forget all those elements, especially when we talk about discriminated groups and escape of poverty. There is really a wide scope for trying new things that have not been done before, for which there is no evidence because they don't exist. And I think this is an important thing also to notice.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to break for coffee now, but just to say thanks once again to Sarah, to Alex and to Jelka for their very insightful comments, difficult questions, and also you to the audience for engaging. We're going to have 15 minutes now for coffee, so we'll come back at 11:45, I think, for our next session. So thank you very much. Thank you.